Hi, my name is Rachel Saunders, and welcome to this episode of the Temporal Hospitality Podcast. As always, if you like what you hear, please subscribe, hit that bell, and generally check out the script below, which has the full transcript in it. Over the summer of 1940, the skies over southern England were filled with the sound of Merlin engines as Spitfires and Hurricanes fought off a German aerial armada during the Battle of Britain. Hundreds of British, Commonwealth, Polish, Czech and other nationalities died defending British skies, and in the aftermath it was the Spitfire which came to symbolise the few who had saved the many. Why is it that the Supermarine Spitfire over all other World War II British aircraft came to symbolise Britishness, and what has kept it in the heart of British public culture? I grew up in Spitfire country, the part of northwest Kent where the downs meet the flat, open terrain leading towards London. As a kid, I was told tales of the local air station at Gravesend, shown the Battle of Britain on TV, and devoured my grandfather's history collection. Being a Kentish lass, there was no way to escape this history. I was 13 when the 50th anniversary of VE Day brought all the surviving veterans out. Young men turned old, and among them was a smattering of RAF pilots who'd fought during the battle. At the time, I didn't grasp how old men could have fought in those planes, and it was only as I myself have aged that it struck me that these old men were, indeed, not a whole lot older than the teenager me at the time of the battle. This is in part, I believe, why the Spitfire has gained such a lauded reputation. It is the gap between the heat of battle and the afterglow of memory. First and foremost, the Spitfire is a killing machine designed to bring down as many planes as possible before the pilot is killed. Its form follows its functions, beautiful curves flowing into a predator's leanness. Front on, it is a bird of prey swooping in, guns ready to set the world ablaze for any unlucky pilot on the receiving end. The young men who flew this were hunters, killers, made in the furnace of war, though not immune to its stresses. Those who survived lived with their deeds, their actions divorced from what we perceive at such a historic distance. Like all war, it is in the moment, never to be repeated. Instead, we are left with the sanitized version of the killing machine, an emblem of victory and sacrifice. I recently visited Imperial War Museum Duxford, which houses the UK's historic aircraft collection. Day trippers who pay a not insubstantial sum can take a joyride in a two-seat Spitfire, getting to experience a brief moment of airtime in the passenger seat. Every hour you spent on site was rent by the sound of a Merlin engine taking off and banking out over the Cambridge countryside. You feel the engine as much as hear it, the raw power shaking the buildings and making you stop to experience it. The Spitfire is not so much an aircraft. It is a vibration, a surround sound, all-encompassing moment that draws you in. Then it is gone. I tried to record it, and all I got was a faint roar, a timid lion off in the distance, not the full-throated, all-body experience. Visceral Beast would be the next addition then, to why British people have an affinity for this machine. Its engine is so distinct, it stops people in the street as it passes overhead. Plenty of prop planes wend over the sky, yet it is the distinctive roar of a Merlin that turns heads. Lancaster bombers have 4 of these beasts, a proper chest thumper as it surges through the skies. Spitfire's solitary one is enough to grab your attention and make you wait for it to pass, or at least that is for me. Makes me crane my head up and track it across the sky. This is not just pure nostalgia, it is living history that anyone in Britain can experience. Indeed, nostalgia alone suggests a yearning for a past that is out of reach. The Spitfire is a tangible living object, with the oldest marks coming up to 90 years old. At Duxford, there is a hangar dedicated to the Battle of Britain which lays out grounded Spitfires of various marks, showing the texture and evolution. What is lacking is visceral living history of the period, the dash, the pell-mell adrenaline of the bell going off to scramble the fighters. Museums are great for evoking curiosity, for fostering a certain narrative, yet they never quite nail it. There is no smell of aviation fuel, no screaming pilots pulled from their cockpits after they were burnt half to death, no bombs shattering into the airfield. It is all sanitised, and we prefer it that way. Here, then, is a third element for why Britain is a Spitfire nation. Nostalgia and a desire to never again have to pull half-burned men from shattered cockpits. The opposite of heroic killing machine is damaged birds rendered apart by enemy machine guns and cannons. Dead men are names on tombstones and memorials, their brutal deaths lionised, yet undwelled upon. In the American Air Museum at Duxford, there is a story of a female Air Force nurse who cared for downed pilots. She is a stark reminder of the horrors of war, that what we choose to remember is a fragment of a fraction of the total whole. It is the afterglow of memory, the willingness to forget the barbarity of war in favour of heroic iconography. Drawing us together, we have aesthetics, a visual reputation, and nostalgia, all of which come together to shape the use of the Spitfire as an emblem of what it means to be British. The sight of a lone Spitfire in the skies belies its actual use in formation flying as part of a flight and squadron. The Spitfire is meant to be a pack predator, a killing machine in pairs or more. So, to see it by itself shows in part how Britain has reshaped its own narrative of self as a plucky underdog. A lone Spitfire during wartime was vulnerable, alone without support. A lone Spitfire in peacetime is the last call to a bygone era. It tells you as much about the narrative Britain wants to project onto the world as it does about the machine itself. Narrative. Truth be told, I'm somewhat ambivalent about the Spitfire. I much prefer the Mosquito, the dual-engined menace which wrought havoc later in the war. For me, the Spitfire represents narrative style over actual substance, though, as always, this says as much about me as anything. When you grow up with a thing, it is easy to take it for granted, especially when the history is right on your doorstep. Having history buffs in the family certainly helped stir a certain passion for digging a bit deeper than what the television showed, which means that when I come to explore these types of narrative, I am conscious that there's a whole lot more out there to talk about. Yet, the Spitfire lingers. It saw service across the whole war on land and sea, even serving during the Arab-Israeli War in 1949. Its history, though, is only part of the mythos. The film, The Battle of Britain, did much to show the nature of aerial combat in 1940, while also showing the fallout of the battle on ground crew and civilians. Its narrative shows the complex interplay between the men who fought in the air and those who serviced them on the ground. Tom Hardy's Spitfire pilot in Dunkirk brought a visceral reminder of the risks of fighting during 1940, with all three planes shown in the film failing to return home. How we tell the story matters as much as the machine, with Spitfires emblematic of the sacrifices made. This is why nostalgia plays such a strong role in the arc of Spitfire history. We are told that it was a war-winning machine, shown black and white footage of dogfights, and have no inherent reason not to believe the narrative. It is what gets left out on the roadside of history which provides a real texture, and why I suggest that any nostalgic reading of killing machines leaves out the brutality that war involves. You see this in the sanitised version which societies show on television and in games. No producer wants to traumatise their audience with the actual reality of fighting a close-quarters aerial war where body and mind were shattered. Even those who survived were irrevocably changed by the experience, and nostalgia allows us to compartmentalise that trauma. Soldiers returning from war have long struggled to reconnect with the societies they were fighting for. War messes with your head. The training to get you ready for war reprograms soldiers to give them a killer instinct. In the air in 1940, young men were sent to their deaths by superior officers, knowing full well that those who survived would be toughened up and brutalised by the experienced. Later conflicts drew this out, especially the Vietnam War, where the survivors were given the cold shoulder by a society who rejected the war they were fighting in. This did not happen to Spitfire pilots, but the arc of history has dulled the fact that they were teenagers and early 20-somethings, with personal suffering was erased in the jubilation of victory. Spitfires became a mythic symbol on par with Excalibur, while the fighting men were seen as knights whose texture was irrelevant. Of course, I'm ignoring the volumes of biographies that have since been written of the pilots and the last of the few. I concur with Churchill that never in the field of human combat have so many owed so much to so few. Yet, at the time, Churchill knew full well that this was propaganda soundbites designed to inspire the nation. History is complex precisely because there is no one way to own or interpret it. Spitfires represent that complexity because we are prepared to set aside the brutality of the myth, and I don't think that's wrong. Myths serve a purpose, especially when they bring people together in dark times. They become problematic when the mythic purpose is used to twist and reshape a nation into something it never was. Since the 100 Years' War in the 1300s, English history has been shaped by a them and us narrative, usually in antagonism with the French, Spanish, or Germans. To be English was explicitly about not being French, and during the 20th century, not being German. Growing up, I regularly heard the expression 2 world wars and 1 World Cup to taunt any German with. A bit of national hyperbole that belied the economic mess Britain was in at the time. I suggest that the Spitfire myth has been twisted by those seeking to use its narrative to make Britain parochial and narrow-minded. Patriotism and nationalism are 2 sides of the same coin, both rooted in a desire to belong and reject those they don't want to allow in. A patriot may love their country, but blind love is corrosive and damaging. While patriots may claim to protect their country, if patriotism slips into jingoism, it causes immense harm. Nationalism is a weaponized patriotism, the curdling of the patriotic spirit, which excludes any and all people not deemed part of the national spirit. The Spitfire has been used variously as a spirit for patriotic pride, a symbol of patriotic might, and then latterly as a mythic icon invoked in a time of patriotic need. Nationalists have usurped this mythos, leaving out all the Poles, Czechs, and other non-British pilots who fought for Britain in their dash to define the Spitfire as a symbol of British and English nationalism. It has curdled the myth and made it into a fairy tale through which to craft a nationalist nightmare. Over the cliffs of Dover. If you stand on the cliffs overlooking the English Channel, you can just about make out the French coast on the other side on a clear day. As a kid, I marvelled as hovercraft flew out of their ramps, the sonorous thrum of their engines carrying a mile or more up to me. They represented a sense of progress that nerdy 8-year-old me just stopped and stared at. 52 years before RAF pilots roamed the skies, fighting back aerial invaders, their exhaust trails crisscrossed the summer sky, made famous in the painting of the battle. The vapour trails are as intangible as the memories I have watching the shipping across the channel, something which I can only grasp at 35 years distance. I am now older than the distance between the Battle of Britain and my birth date, a living link between the few and those who come after me. Future generations will ask us what it was like to live with the myths in our midst. Maybe this is what Camelot was like. There will come a time when the last Spitfire is grounded for good, when no more merlins issue their full-throated roar through the sky, Like the Avro Vulcan and many other extinct machines of war, it will exist on film and long in the memory, carried aloft in our dreams and imaginations. It is those imaginings that we must keep the toxic mythologizing at bay, to ensure that the Spitfire is a mythic bird of salvation in the darkest hour, not a cudgel to wield against those who we other. I suggest that what has made the Spitfire such a cornerstone of Britishness is that ability to dual wield it both as a symbol of salvation from the dark and a weapon against the other. The Allies' total victory in 1945 left little room for accurate comparisons of German aircraft, though, as the Cold War wended its way on, invariably the Bf-109 and Me-262 were invariably brought up as the Spitfire's nemesis. YouTube has seen an explosion of content breaking down German war weapons, with each creator shaping the narrative to fit whatever version of history they ascribe to. The cold fact is that the Germans did indeed create effective killing machines, which tore through inexperienced pilots or through obsolete Allied planes. Germany lost the war because she was outproduced and outfought, unable to supply her fighting forces with enough material. All comparisons and opinion pieces are moot because the Third Reich was a political mess which relied on rapacious ransacking of occupied territories and slave labour to keep the economy afloat. There were brave Germans who racked up large kill counts on both fronts, their deeds unsung because Germany lost the war. Those Germans who flew over the White Cliffs did so in the firm belief they were justified, their cause righteous. Every Hurricane and Spitfire they shot down, every airfield bombed, and every Allied pilot killed was another mark in the progress towards victory. Until it wasn't. German casualties during the Battle of Britain were horrific. The experienced air crews who had invaded Poland and France were decimated, with entire formations decimated by the battle's end. The Luftwaffe never recovered its core, as experienced pilots were not rested or used to train the next generation. We do not talk about the Bf-109 spirit, because to do so would invoke tragic and futile loss in the pursuit of immoral ends. Thus, when British people lionize the Spitfire and invoke its spirit, what exactly are we invoking? It is the heady 6 weeks of defiance, the willing sacrifice of hundreds of men and women to a morally justified cause, a turning point after which the British stood firm and alone against the darkness, or at least that is the myth we want to project. Britain in 1940 was an empire from which hundreds of thousands came to fight. It was a safe harbour for Poles, Czechs, Dutch, Belgians, French, Norwegians, and every other nationality who fought back against fascistic tyranny. Plucky Britain was the Allies, and the Allies were Britain. Without Polish pilots and their skills, the Battle of Britain would have been a knife's edge. Without French political presence in the UK, the Allied cause would have been undermined. British and English nationalists who invoked the Spitfire in 1940 forget this, that it was the refugees and immigrants who stood shoulder to shoulder with us to fight back against the darkness engulfing Europe. United, we stand. Just like Camelot and Excalibur, the Spitfire represents strength in unity, strength through plurality. Alone, each knight of the Round Table was vulnerable and alone. Just like a single Spitfire pilot in the air, Britain did not and could not fight the Third Reich and the Axis alone. It took all the people of the world to come together in one short, hot summer to blunt the German Luftwaffe, and through the killing power of the Spitfire and Hurricane, chuck them back over the Channel. This is the Spitfire spirit. Together we stand. As 1940 fades into textbooks and grainy footage, how does Britain move forward and ensure that the lessons of the 1940s are not forgotten? This is the grand question all historians and teachers ask of every moment in history, and no answer will ever square it away. Much like Rorke's Drift, Waterloo, and Agincourt, the Battle of Britain is invoked in mythic ways because it serves Britons to do so. Each was a coalition of disparate elements coming together to fight for a greater whole. Each has been mythologised far beyond the original intent or outcome of the battle in the British imagining. Spitfires aesthetically sit alongside redcoats, longbows, King Harry and St George, with the Battle of Britain Day invoked in the same breath as St Crispin's. This cuts to the heart of Britain being a Spitfire nation. The plane represents every nation who fought back against tyranny, not just the British pilots English nationalists seek to claim for their own. The greatest lesson we can learn from the few, as it took the globe to defend Britain, and that in the time of our greatest need they all answered the call, not just the jolly chaps from the home counties. This is why I celebrate the few in all their complicated narratives, for the all-tragic sacrifice they chose to make so that the Germans were fought off. It was not so much a duty as knowing that if they did not, then who would? I stood on the side of the Duxford airfield as a Spitfire taxied past, waiting for it to take off. Off in the distance it idled, waited, quiet. Then the pilot spun up the engine, a building thrum over the spring air. Slowly at first, then gathering momentum, it sprang down the grass until airborne it soared heavenward. A rhapsody of aviation gas and tender, lovingly cared for engine filled our ears, and with it the Spitfire ventured forth. Try telling me that the Spitfire spirit is owned by a few nationalists with English flags. It brings together the world fighting back against the darkest forces imaginable. It represents a united kingdom of all Britons, wherever you may have come from, and it is this inheritance for all of those who value a pluralistic democracy.